I'm your host, Todd Nesloni, elementary principal, teacher, and now the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for TEPSA. Each week, I look to bring you different guests who have encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another, and have them come on and tell some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. I am thrilled this week to have my very special guest, Cassie Reynolds, on with me. Cassie, tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
So, like Todd said, my name is Cassie Reynolds. I taught with Todd for almost 5 years in Navasota. This is my 8th year teaching. This will be my 6th year in 4th grade. I taught 2 years in 7th grade, all ELA. So, as far as I know a lot of people talk about where they're from. I still am struggling with that. Growing up military, I'm not really from anywhere. I've kind of grown up all over the world, but I would say Texas. I can't really. My husband gives me so much grief for it. He's like, you can't say you're from Texas because you were not born here. But I've spent the majority of my life here. But yeah, so I teach elementary. I teach 4th grade, and I absolutely adore it.
So I want to jump into that military upbringing. So was that from birth? You were a military brat?
Yes. So actually, it's a funny story. So my parents, it sounds like for eons ago, but back Cold War, it was towards the end of the Cold War. My parents were actually stationed in Germany. And my mom, at that point in time, near their base, the only hospital that was on base, because the Berlin Wall was still up at the time. Mm-hmm. And so the hospital on their side of the wall, they only spoke German. And my mom was like, there is no way on earth I'm going to have you in a German-speaking hospital. If I'm having a baby, I need to be somewhere where they speak English. So she actually flew back to where the rest of my family is from, in Wisconsin. And that's where she had me. And then I think she said 8 or 9 weeks old, like the youngest you can fly with a baby overseas, they flew me back to Germany. And I was actually there for a couple years.
So what do you remember most about all the travel and changing and all that? What sticks with you the most when you think about those days?
I think just it's so weird that in our right now there's so much going on with diversity, but that was my life. So I didn't know anything different because when I was in 6th grade, we moved, end of 5th grade going to 6th, we moved to Egypt. And so I went to a private international school. There were kids from 150 different countries. So that was something that was normal to me. It wasn't different to see all these different kinds of kids from different countries speaking different languages, having different beliefs, or being different, period. Right. So it's so crazy because that was back in 2000. And so it's so crazy to bring that into my teaching because I'm like, y'all, you don't even understand. I said that around the world, there are kids this is not having one person that's different or 5 people that are different in your class. That's nothing. I mean, that's something that we grew up and we were used to. But that was, I think, something that I remember the most is when we were at that school for sports competitions, we actually got to play other countries. And so that was probably the coolest thing I got to do because I think it was 6th grade, we actually got to go to Greece. And so we had a big tournament with volleyball, soccer, and basketball. And it was just so neat to just see these different countries and meet these different people that I know I never would have been able to do otherwise.
That's so neat. And I bet, being in the classroom now, that it's such a neat perspective that you bring that's unique to you, having all those kind of interactions with all types of people. I'm sure it helps you connect with your kids a little bit easier, knowing that they come from all different kinds of backgrounds and you're able to find some way to build that relationship a little quicker. Do you find that's true?
Yeah, definitely. Because I think especially a lot of times as teachers, we are really hesitant to share our stories with our kids and our upbringing and our growing up. And I think being an ELA teacher kind of forced me to do that. That's not something when I went to school to be a history teacher. I wanted to be a high school coach. Never in my wildest dreams imagined I would be in elementary ever. I was like, those kids, I don't have the patience for that. But it's one of those things where it's being able to bring your personal stories in, and especially if you have anything outside of the city you live in, the kids think it's so magical and amazing, and they love it. And especially our kids who are not from the area, or they are different, they have different religions. I've noticed they really appreciate you bringing those kinds of stories in.
Well, and it's so funny that you talk about that because I truly believe, and I've seen this through a lot of the conversations I've had on this podcast, is that you don't even realize the importance of those little add-ins and those little shifts until you start doing it,
Yeah.
until you start seeing the impact it makes in the kids. Then you're like, wow, I feel so bad I didn't bring that up, or we
Mm-hmm.
didn't talk about this. And so I love that you do that. But you also mentioned starting out thinking you were going to be completely secondary. And you were a secondary teacher before I kidnapped you and
Yes.
stole you away over to Navasota, and you became a brilliant elementary teacher. But what did you find? That's scary,
Mm-hmm.
making that move when you're so in a place that you're comfortable with ages that you think are great. How did you not let that fear consume you and still feel like you could get out there and take a risk?
Oh, that was like an everyday thing. It was like, I will never forget in my interview. I remember when you were talking to me and you were asking me questions. I vividly remember when you said, "How do you feel about self-contained?" And I said, "What's that?" Like, what is that? What does that even mean? I've taught seventh grade ELA for a few years, and then I worked in SPED at the high school. So I was like, I have no idea what self-contained is. But it's hard, when you feel like you have a good thing going. It's hard to step out of that comfort zone unless sometimes you're forced.
Right.
And I know that that's very hard, especially as a new teacher, because I had my own classroom for 2 years, so that's still very brand new. But making that jump from secondary to elementary, I was absolutely terrified. But luckily, I had really good people with me, and I had people who supported me every step of the way, and just helped me really kind of show me the ropes of how elementary really works, because it is a totally different ball game. But I mean, it's fun. I love it's so different because, like, with elementary, middle, and high school, there are different awesome things about each group of kids. When I was in high school, you can have those really serious intellectual conversations with them. With middle school, you have a lot of the personality, and you can see them become grown people. I know some of the very first kids I taught in seventh grade, I still keep in contact with them, and some of them are about to get married, and it's like the craziest thing. But it's, seeing the impact on them. That was, 8 years later. It's really neat. But I know, like, when you go to elementary, you have to wait a little bit longer to see those changes. But I love how much you can see, especially like in the upper elementary, how much you can see them grow in a year. It's incredible. I mean,
You know,
it's amazing.
One thing that I've always really appreciated about you is your willingness to take risks. And no, none of us always jump into it willingly. Sometimes we're pushed, sometimes we're pulled screaming. But once you got there, you were like, you know what? If it's going to be about taking a risk, we're going to go all in. We're going
Exactly.
to do it. A lot of that, I think, really plays out into some of the success you've had and some of the creative things you've been able to do by taking those risks. But it's terrifying, exactly like
Hmm.
what you said. So what do you feel like is the biggest thing you've learned about yourself by constantly putting yourself in those situations that are uncomfortable?
I think, it's like we tell our kids, don't be afraid to fail, because you will at some point. It's inevitable. Especially those first couple times you try something. Sometimes you will be successful on that first
Yeah.
try, but there are a lot of times where you will not be. And I think it goes back to having good people and good relationships with, your colleagues, and leaning on other people on, if you weren't successful, how can you be more successful? Or right now I have two really awesome first year ELA partners, and they are all aboard with all my crazy ideas. So it's really fun.
Yeah.
So I'm really helping them take some risks, and it's like, look, I've done this before. Like, don't stress out.
Mhm.
But I mean, it is, just it's taking that first step and just knowing that it's okay if it doesn't work out. And I think our kids seeing that helps them also take those first steps to take a risk as well.
Well, and I think that plays great into my next question, which is, as we take those risks, and you talked about failure and things like that, but another thing that we talk about quite often on these podcasts are that seeping in of doubt, of not allowing it to take root, because I think in especially creative people, that doubt can take hold so quickly and often stop you from achieving really great things, because you just tell yourself, well, I'm not as good as this other person, or it's not going to turn out very great, or nobody really cares, or anything like that. So when doubt starts creeping in your own life, how do you not let it take control?
That is like one of the hardest questions I think you've ever asked, because that even still 8 years later, and I actually had a conversation with my partner teacher. She's been teaching for over 13 years, and we both, I mean, on a daily basis, that is a struggle. I mean, I know as educators, we are our biggest critics. We want to do what's best for our kids, and we constantly worry about, is it what's best for our kids? And so I know for me, it's like I said before, having those people where they can reassure me that, hey, don't worry, don't stress, you got this. And it's just kind of pushing past that fear, because I know in the past I've doubted myself so much, but I've also pushed past it and seeing great things come from it too.
Well, I love what you said about having those people, because I think that is a really big determining factor. Is having those people who you feel safe enough going to them to tell them that you're struggling with doubt. Because I think what so many educators do, especially with this popularity of social media, which you're active on as well, is we get in this mindset of everybody's better than what we're doing, and we don't really know. We got to step back because we can't keep up with that kind of stuff. And so how do you keep out of that comparison game? Because I know, even for me, I still find myself, just like you said, dealing with doubt all the time, dealing with the comparison thing all the time. I personally don't believe that it's ever something that goes away. I think it's that you learn coping mechanisms that help you work through it every time it pops up. But when it comes to that whole comparison idea, how do you not get lost in trying to be the Pinterest-worthy, Instagram-pretty teacher?
See, it's funny you say the coping mechanisms, because that reminds me a lot of my ADHD. Like it's one of those things where it's the same thing where it's going to happen, it's coming, but you deal with it in certain ways. But see, like back when you and I first started working together, I had just started on Twitter maybe the year before. So Instagram wasn't really, I don't feel like it was, I don't even know if it was a thing. I don't remember. If it was, it wasn't super popular. So at this point in time, I feel like, especially new teachers, I feel like they lean on that a lot. Because that with social media, with Facebook, with Twitter, Instagram, any of that, a lot of times we just see that highlight reel. We see all the good things going on. We don't see the struggles behind it. We don't see, like you posted yesterday, the desk turned over with the mess. That's not something you typically see on social media. Like, hey, I had a really hard day today. This is what happened. You see the fun room transformations and all the fun activities we do. And so I feel like, especially, with when you're on Instagram, when you're on Twitter, when you're on Facebook, like those people struggle too. Some of them have already started, like some of them have come out and started talking about those struggles. Some don't, but I think that's so important to realize that as educators, we all struggle. It's not always your classroom. I would say even on a weekly basis is not Instagram worthy. It's not going to definitely be on a daily basis. So, I mean, it's something that you can't put yourself to that standard, because it is so unrealistic. And I think I was lucky enough not to become a beginning teacher in that era of the beginnings of social media getting so popular like that.
Well, and I love what you said too about noticing that there are a lot of educators now that have followings that are starting to be more authentic and transparent. And I think that that's really important of any of us that are going to use social media, that we share those celebrations and we share those lessons we're proud of and those things, but we don't be afraid to share this didn't work today, or today was a really bad day. And I think though that there's a clear line between sharing a struggle and complaining and beating down the profession. Because even you mentioned the photo I shared yesterday, and I think it's the most popular photo I've ever shared on Facebook. Good Lord. But the conversations on there are not pretty with some of the people. But how do you not get caught up in negativity? Because it's so easy, no matter what campus you work on, to have negativity creep in. How do you not let it consume you, where then you become one of the people that is bringing the negativity on campus?
So normally kind of how I roll with negativity, because that's again inevitable. We're going to get to a point where we've just had enough. We need to complain, but I have my people who I know I trust, who I can lean on, but then we move on. That's it. We either solve the problem or we move on, because that's really how you have to deal with it now. Especially
and what I will say is what you just said, that is the truth, people, about Cassie. If she got a problem, she will lay it out and
Yep.
she'll be like, no, this is the issue. And then it's like, okay, I'm ready to move on now. We can work
And
through
then
it.
we're good. We're
Yes,
done.
I
It might be
appreciate that
5
honesty.
minutes, and then we're good.
That's
But
right.
I mean, but we need those people that we can just. It's not necessarily that we're just being negative all the time, but sometimes we just need to vent. We need to get something off our chest, and then, okay, I'm better. I think maybe I can solve my own problem, or maybe I need to go somebody else to help me solve that problem. But I honestly, I try to steer clear. I don't like being part of that. It makes me kind of think of Mean Girls. I don't like to be a part of that, because I feel like as an educator, the people you associate with, that's who you become like. And so I try to stay as positive as possible. And so if I'm constantly around negative people, that's going to give me negative energy too. And then I will be that way. And I don't want to be negative, because if I'm negative, my kids will be negative. So it's a domino effect.
It's so true. And I love what you said too about the importance of venting, because, I think it's important to keep people in your circle that are going to tell you when you're just acting a fool.
Yes.
Like they're just going to step up and say, okay, that's so dumb. Like, stop complaining about that. Like, because I have those people in my life and they step on my toes sometimes, but I know that I have to remind myself, no, that's why you have them in your circle, so that they will keep you accountable, so that you don't become this huge, just complaining about everything thing. But I want to kind of shift gears just a little bit and these last couple minutes and just talk about, when you think about your life and what you've been through and all the experiences you've had, all those things play into the woman you are today. So when you glance back at those experiences, what is one in particular that stands out in your head that you think really impacted who you are today?
Oh my gosh. I have a lot of
You can't say your kids, because that doesn't count.
No. I think, gosh, I think seeing my mom, so growing up military, my dad was gone a lot, whether he was in Iraq or he was at training in the field for a month or 2 months at a time. And so right now, I am a law enforcement wife. And I told, it was so funny, because I told my mom, I will never marry somebody in the military. I grew up that way. That was hard enough. But it's funny, because I married a police officer. And it's almost the same thing. And so seeing how my mom dealt with that and worked through it with both my sister and I, because, it was just us, the three of us, if my dad was, when we were overseas, there were times that he was gone too. But my mom has always worked. My dad has always worked. So with my sister and I, seeing her be so strong through all the struggles that I've faced in my own life with my own kids now, because a lot of times, even though you are married, there's a lot of times where it's almost like you're a single parent. And so there's a lot of times where I call my mom and I'm like, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I was such a rotten kid sometimes, because, you don't realize that how strong adults are sometimes. Like, you don't see the other things going on. You just see people at face value, and if they've got a strong face, they've got it going on. They're not struggling through anything. And so seeing my mom, and now that I'm a parent and I'm married to somebody who has gone a lot, knowing what she had to go through to help my sister and I be successful is kind of what I'm going through with my kids. And it's just, I'm trying to be, I want to be like that. I want to be like my mom, where I'm the constant for my kids, but I'm also helping them just have a good life.
I know. Yeah. So, on that same vein, when you think about people that have played a role into growing you outside of family, who's someone that comes to mind that you're like, yeah, I wouldn't be who I am today without this person?
That's that's a double-edged sword. So, growing up, I was always good at school. I was just one of those kids. I was good at school. I loved school. I was that kid you wanted in your class, unless I was on one of my ADHD tangents, then you did not want me in your class. But I loved school, and I always thought, I want to be a teacher. This looks like so much fun, until I got to 7th grade. And so in 7th grade, that's when we lived in Egypt. It's crazy how, certain teachers leave an impact on you, both positive and negative. And so I was in an algebra class in 7th grade, and I had this teacher who he had previously taught college, and that's how he ran his 7th grade classroom. And my brain did not work like that. It just didn't. I learned differently. I needed different things. And he told me that was not okay. That, nope, this is how you have to do it. And so at that point in time, I did not want to be a teacher anymore. I said, I can't do this. I don't want to do it. I was miserable. I hated seventh grade. Especially in math class, I dreaded going to math. And I had always loved math before. But then fast forward a couple of years, when I moved from Egypt to Colorado, I had two phenomenal teachers that I would say really that they made me want to be high school teachers because they made learning fun. And they were the people who, as an adult, like you would want to be friends with after school. You would want to keep in touch with them and keep in contact because they got to know you and they got to know your story. And if you were different or you learned different, by golly, they made sure you got it. And so it's just people like that. I've had little snippets of teachers within my life that I wish I could combine them all into one person, but that's what I would like to be like as an educator, because I know what it felt like to be loved as a kid by teachers, but I also know the struggle as well. And I don't want my kids to feel that way, because I know a lot of kids go through school, especially elementary. That's their school life.
Yep, you're exactly right. Well, Cassie, you also had a unique experience. As you know, my second book, Stories from Webb, we worked together at Webb Elementary. You got to contribute and become a published author for that as well. Tell me a little bit about what that experience was like for you.
It was amazing. I remember when you first asked us about, if we would be willing to write a story, it's like, absolutely. But then I had no clue what I was going to write about. And it's funny you asked that, because even now, the things that I've gone through and just thinking about different experiences in education, it's like, man, I wish I would have submit that for the book. That would have been a perfect story. But it was just so neat to be able to, I feel like I'm this, this normal person, and I feel like I don't want to say nobody, but, in the education world, when you feel like you're just another teacher compared to some of, your big Instagram, Twitter people, it's really neat to see your words and your thoughts on a published book, and to give other people your book and say, hey, I wrote that, check out that chapter, or, hey, my friend wrote this chapter, I think it would be perfect for you. So it was just such a neat experience. It's something I never in my wildest dreams imagined would ever happen, but I'm so thankful that I got to have that experience.
Well, you're exactly right about, that was the whole idea behind it too, was that we hear so often from all these, for a lack of a better word, edgy celebrities,
Yeah.
where their voices are always the amplified ones. And it's like, well, what about the teacher who is killing it in the classroom every day, but nobody ever hears about what he or she does because they're just on the grind all the time? And I loved when I got to read from cover to cover for the first time after piecing all the stories together, to say, because even as the school principal, and I'm sure you felt this way too from working with the team, is that even though you work with these people, and some of them you had worked with them for 3 years at the time, reading some of those stories, you were like, wow, I never knew that this person went through this, or I didn't realize that they thought this, or they had this experience. And it was such a great reminder that even the people who don't get the spotlight recognition are still doing incredible things, and their stories are equally as important.
But it was so neat reading through it too. Like you said, people I worked with for 3 years, I learned so many new things about the people I'd worked with, and it brought so many connections together, things that we would have never talked about. They talked about in that book, and it was just so neat that we got to see different sides of each other, and it brought us that much closer. I mean, it was truly I don't even know what kind of experience you would call it. It was amazing. I mean, I don't think there's anything like it that you could replicate.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great reminder of the importance of learning everybody's stories and not just superficially, not just, oh, well,
Mhm.
what kind of lessons have you done? Like
Yes.
that's what I loved about the book is it became much more than an educator book. It
Mhm.
became a book about life and about people. And that book is the reason that this whole podcast was started. I just want to get on here and just learn about people and allow them to share these little itty bitsy pieces because I've received so many messages of thank you for interviewing this person. I've never heard of them, but when they talked about this, that really meant something to me to know that I'm not the only one going through this. And I
Mhm.
think anytime we can feel that way, because in those moments of struggle, we feel so alone, that
Yes.
anytime we can be reminded that we're not, that's a success.
Well, and even like so many of the people you've interviewed, like their names are like some of them are very well known,
Mhm.
but even within your videos, I mean, there are new things that they bring out
Mhm.
that it's like, oh, they have never said anything about that
Right.
online. And so it's so neat to hear the backside of their story as well, especially several of the published authors that you've interviewed
Mhm.
too. So it's really neat to hear their side of the story too.
Well, Cassie, I always love ending these conversations on the same question. And that is if there was one thing that you wish more people knew or understood, what would your one thing be?
It's all about relationships. That's, I think, as an educator, that it's kind of always been my thing. I had a phenomenal mentor teacher my first year teaching. Her and I are still very close friends, but that's something that she really kind of instilled in me, especially with
Mhm.
seventh graders. Oh my lord, that was huge. But relationships with your kids, but then relationships with your peers. Like
Right.
you can't just pour your all into your kids. You also have
Mhm.
to have relationships with your colleagues
So
or other
good.
people, other educators that you can trust, whether you know them face to face or you know them online. I think you've got to make sure that you keep all those relationships very close. And with your kids, I think that's kind of the most important thing in my book is just make sure you get to know your kids and make sure you have good relationships with them.
What a great way to end. And you even had some friends on today. I saw Leisha, Andrea,
Yeah,
Brent all
I saw
commenting
Brit.
on the side. Well,
Yeah.
Cassie, I got to tell you, I am so thankful that we are in each other's lives and that we got to spend 5 years working on the same campus together and just all the great things you bring to education. And I know that you were terrified when I asked you to come on this show, but I'm so glad you did because I'm looking to bring in all of y'all who wrote for Stories from Web and feature
Awesome.
all y'all. So I appreciate you so much and thank you for all the work you do.
Thank you for interviewing me, Todd. I appreciate it.
And thank you so much, everybody, for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on Spotify, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, it's there. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's conversation, and I hope it has inspired you to get out there and tell your story because every story matters.